So these are the 5 college essay questions that counselors should be able to help their students answer. And I generally shy away from shoulds because I think that when we get too many shoulds, I don't know, it starts to feel pressure, but this was just a way of kind of hooking people into it. And here are questions that I get all the time, really, is probably the better way, but that's not a very sexy title. So, my favorite buffet in the world is the Bellagio buffet in Las Vegas, Nevada. And growing up, I didn't grow up with a lot of money. So whenever we got to go to a buffet as a kid, it was like a dream come true. It was like amazing. Like, yes, we've arrived. And what makes the Bellagio especially special is they've got these king crab legs, all you can eat, and you can just go nuts there if you're into that. Or they've got this incredible dessert, really like section. It's not even just like a part, it's like a section. They've got, I think that's Kobe beef and Wellington lamb there. And did I mention the desserts? Just amazing. They've got creme brulee. It's just beautiful. So Lola May once said, there are 3 things to remember when teaching. Know your stuff, know whom you are stuffing, and then stuff them elegantly. So throughout this webinar today, I'm not actually going to be stuffing you. What I'm going to be doing is providing you a buffet and allow you to pick and choose, to kind of graze if you feel like grazing, or if you feel like going deeper, you can follow, I'll give you some links and resources, and you can gorge yourself as you please. Just be careful. Oh, and so just to sort of highlight that, the reason why I say be careful is because it's 157 college essay resources that I'm going to be giving you today. And you're like, what? 157? No way. It's true. And you'll see how that unfolds in the next few minutes. And I was going to say, just be careful you don't end up like this guy. This is a shot from the Las Vegas Bellagio buffet. Or end up that guy if you want. But here are the 5 questions I get all the time. So number 1, students ask me, how do I figure out what to write about? Number 2, how do I structure my essay? Number 3, how do I outline my essay? 4, how do I revise it? And 5, how do I bring it to life? In other words, how do I make it not boring? And I'm going to get through all that in 45 minutes. Okay, question 1, what do I write about? So I have this exercise that I love called the Essence Objects exercise, and I'm not going to take you through it right now. I'll send you a link. I'll give you a link in a second where you can hear the whole exercise. But basically, it involves looking at the objects of your life, and not just literal objects, but also metaphoric objects that represent something deep and true about who you are. So for me, I always carry a green pen with me. It's one of my essence objects. And the reason I always carry a green pen is because I always grade my students' essays in green. Because for me, if I grade in red, it looks, bloody or sort of defeating, or it even sends the message subconsciously, stop. And for me, I want to not send the message of stop to my students, but, keep going. And that's an essence I want to communicate to them. So a green pen would go in my essence objects box. And so what this exercise does is it asks students through it's kind of a guided meditation or a guided imaginative exercise to write down a series or a set of essence objects that represent who they are. And it's a great way of going deep, really, really quick, actually. I mean, because we write down these objects and it might be something related to a student's mother or a father who maybe there's a strained relationship. Rather than having to write about the strain of the relationship, what it gives you, the counselor, is a menu to discuss the thing. So you ask, so what does that whistle represent? And it might be that there's a whole story just in that whistle. So it helps the students, 1, to get concrete and tangible, to give them content, things they can write about. Let me tell you about this whistle. But it also gives you a menu, like I said, of kind of diving in and going, well, let's talk about this. Let's go a little deeper here. And you don't actually have to say that. They're like little icebergs poking up on the above the surface. And if you just Google College Essay Guy Objects Exercise, you'll see this little 16-minute, basically an MP3 file with me leading students through that exercise. So that's the first resource. My second favorite exercise in the world is called the Values Exercise. And this one only takes about 3 minutes. And I usually do it right after. But basically, I have students take a look at this exercise, at this sheet rather, and I have them pick the top 10 values that mean the most to them. Then after a couple minutes after they've done that, I say, okay, now that you've got your 10, whittle it down to your top 5. And they kind of groan, oh wow, this is going to be tough. And if it's tough, that's good. That means they're doing the exercise. And then, okay, now get it down to 3. And then pick 1. So they have to get down to what is their top value for today. And what I find this does is it just really boils down to what's important to me right now in my life. And I tell my students, look at that top value. That essence, whatever that is, should probably end up in your essay somehow. I don't know what that looks like yet, but just keep that in mind. In fact, probably your top 3 values are going to end up somewhere in your essay. So that's my second favorite exercise. And I tend to work with a lot of students on the UC1 prompt, which is to describe the world you come from and tell us how your world has shaped your dreams and aspirations. So I see two parts to this. And I apologize for the sound of it's trash day, so the dump trucks are going by. So in the first part of this prompt, it's asking the student to describe the world that the student comes from. And I find that objects exercise is a great way of getting a lot of material and content for that world. So I really recommend that, going to that for the world. The second part of it is the dreams and aspirations. So in terms of dreams and aspirations, sometimes the students say, well, I don't really know what I want to study. I don't know what I want to do. I tell them to look at their values list. I say, these right here, these things, these qualities that are important to you, these I think are your dreams and aspirations. And what I put to them is, whatever career you end up choosing, doctor, lawyer, physical therapist, is going to be an expression of your deepest values. And I want to say that again. I want to highlight that I believe rather than thinking of our career as the be all end all, the place we need to end up at, that's the end. I believe that the career is actually the means to the end. And the end is, I believe, experiencing and expressing our values. So I like to give them that prompt and make that connection for them literally and say, okay, objects exercise for your world, dreams and aspirations, the values list. And that gives us some really good material in about 20 minutes. Some other brainstorming questions I love are these, and I won't spend a lot of time on these. I'll just leave them on the Prezi, and you can come back and look at them or write them down if you like. But these are some of my favorite questions. What's the toughest lesson you ever had to learn? What's your life question? And what I'll do sometimes is at the end of the objects exercise, when they've got a list of objects on the page, and some students will go crazy with that exercise. They'll have 20 or 30 objects. Some will have, 5 or 8. But, chances are there's something in there. And then what I'll do is at the end of that exercise, I'll just kind of tag these questions on at the end. I'll say, okay, now at the bottom of your page, just answer these questions. Because sometimes you can what I'm trying to do is trick them into coming up with the topic. And I'm trying to ask the same question 100 different ways, right? I'm trying to get them to find essentially the answer to this question. What is my deepest story? And sometimes I'll ask that explicitly, but sometimes not. It's just really a reference point for me as a counselor. And, by the way, I won't ask that initially, like an initial brainstorming session. When I will ask that is later, once we're down the line. Let's say we've, 2 drafts have come in and I'm looking at it and it feels like it's just kind of still scratching the surface. Then I will bring this question out and ask, does this really feel like your deepest story? And it's another way of asking, like, what else you got? Is there anything else? Because chances are there's something else if it's not feeling like it. Sometimes you work with a student, they're writing the story of father losing his job and starting to drink and becoming abusive and the turmoil that led to in the house and grades suffering, but then coming back up again. And you just go, wow, there's so much here and this is a lot. This feels like a really deep story. And sometimes, it's kind of like, yeah, and then I went to my friend's house and we played some video games and so you're kind of like, so anyway, I use this question and this is the 10th resource and I'll stop numbering them after this because that's kind of annoying. Okay. So next question, how do I structure my essay? This is the question that I get so often. And let me just go back to this UC1 prompt for a second, because what happened for me as I was working with so many students in California on working this prompt is that I realized the 2 parts to this, describe the world you come from and how it's shaped your dreams and aspirations. I realized that when it came to describing the world, that some of my students had really significant challenges that they'd been through, and some of my students had no challenges. And when it came to dreams and aspirations, some of my students really knew what they wanted to study, and some of them had no idea. And what I realized is that this really broke down into 4 kinds of college essays. That there were A, students who, yes, had faced significant challenges and knew what they wanted to study. There were B, students who had not faced significant challenges but knew what they wanted to study. There were C, students who had faced significant challenges but did not know what they wanted to study. And D, students who had not faced challenges and didn't know what they wanted to study. And so I realized that for each one of these types of students, first of all, putting them on a graph made the D type students who sometimes experience shame around not knowing these 2 things, made them know that they were just another type of student, and that actually there is a way to work with each of these types of students, and there's a way to outline the essay. So very briefly, I want to talk about, should a student tell a story of the life or from their lives? And the way that I've found this to work is that either can actually work. Students could tell one specific story to go really deep into their lives, or they can jump around and tell a lot of different parts of it. In two ways that I found to organize this, and again, this is I'm giving this to you very fast. You'll find more information and details on the resources that I'll give you at the end. But the narrative structure, and there's a montage structure. So narrative structure is basically telling a story. And a narrative goes, A happened, which led to B, which led to C, which led to D. So there's a kind of causal connection between events. And that works really well for some students. And that can work either for a specific moment, or it can work for, this is my life. I started off at 4, and then this happened when I was 8, and go forward. A montage structure will work better if students want to jump around a little bit. They're like, well, I don't really see the connection. I don't really have a lot of stuff to work with. So just to go back a second, the narrative structure, I find, works really well for type A students who have faced challenges and know what they want to study, and type C students who have faced challenges but don't know what they want to study. Whereas the montage structure, jumping around a little bit, tends to work better, in my experience, with the B students who've not faced challenges but know what they want to study, and the D students who've not faced challenges and don't know what they want to study. And I'm going to explain more about how to do that in just a second. But just to clarify this connection, narrative structure is making causal connections, whereas montage structure is more about making a thematic connection. Because with the montage structure, because it's not A led to B, led to C, led to D, we need something else to tie the thing together, what I like to call a focusing lens or a framing device. And again, we'll look at some examples in a second. But here's a narrative structure example, the Porcelain God essay. It begins with status quo. So I was eating Chinese food with my parents one day. This is how it was, just another day eating Chinese food, when suddenly there was an inciting incident. Suddenly I found myself bowing down to the porcelain god. What happened, we wonder. What's going on? It raises a question. Raising of the stakes. I was in anaphylactic shock. I became scared of death, eating, and even my own body. This is quoting from the student's essay. Denouement. As I learned more about the medical world, I became more fascinated with the body's immune responses, specifically how a body reacts to allergens. My regular visits to my allergy specialist inspired me to become an allergy specialist. This one kind of worked out really neatly. The new status quo, so the change from the beginning, is I want to study biology so I can one day help others so they won't have to feel the same fear that I felt. And if you're interested in reading this whole essay, you can search Porcelain God on the College Essay Guy website. But that's a very brief example of how a story can lead to an essay and how it can be charted out in these very particular bullet-pointed ways. And an explanation of each of status quo and inciting incident, more in-depth, is on the website. I don't mean this to be an ad for the website. I'm just trying to give you a place where you can go so you can find out more about this stuff that I'm just, kind of going through pretty fast. So a second structure example or option is the montage structure, and it's from the Machines essay. And this student basically says in his first paragraph, I've always been curious. And in the second paragraph, he says, I've been working with my hands for years. I've been obsessed with details. I'm a math geek. I love sharing my knowledge with others. And all these qualities will serve me well in my career as not an engineer, but an endodontist, which is a type of dentist. And if you Google College Essay Guy Example B, you'll see how this whole essay turned into an example. But I give these two to show you that it's possible to do sort of the, I was eating Chinese food and then I threw up and then I realized it was anaphylactic shock, and then I went to the doctor and I started learning more about allergies and realized I want to become an allergy specialist. So there's a very causal connection there. Whereas what holds the Machines essay together, and you'll read it, is there's this connection to machines, this sort of thematic thread. And basically the writer talks about all these great qualities that are going to help him become a great endodontist at the end. And he doesn't reveal what he wants to be until the end, which makes it a really nice kind of surprise ending. But what he's done is reverse engineered the essay. In other words, he thought, well, what would make a great endodontist or dentist? What are some of those qualities? And how have I shown those? I'll say more about that in just a minute. So I believe a good essay should either go deep, discussing one moment that fundamentally changed your life, or go wide, discussing many different elements of your life, just as these two examples have. And I think narrative structure really helps the students go deep, and I think montage structure helps students go wide. So, how do we outline the essay? Well, here's how. I think step one is to decide what are the big chunks of the essay. This is Chunk from Goonies, from that 80s movie. So what are the big chunks of the essay? What do I mean by that? Well, If Aristotle taught third grade and he was asking students to define their big chunks, he just means the beginning, middle, and end. So if we can just define or decide on those 3 chunks, what's the beginning of the essay, what's the middle of the essay, and how does it end up, we're off to a good start. So with that example, the beginning of the essay, I was eating Chinese food, then I threw up, anaphylactic shock, and then I wanted to become an allergy specialist. So those are the big chunks. The big chunks of this essay: curiosity, working with my hands, obsession with details, math geek, sharing knowledge with others, endodontist. So those are all the big chunks. Those are the pieces. So we start by just defining, okay, well, what is the big content? What are our big rocks before we get to the little rocks? And step 2 of this, so once we define the big chunks, it depends on the essay type we're writing. So here's how to outline any essay in 6 minutes. And this is a little sneak peek I have this 6-part webinar series that's using the secrets of screenwriting to write your college essay. So I'm giving you kind of a 6-minute sneak peek into it. So for type A students who have faced significant challenges, like the student who went into anaphylactic shock and who knew what she wanted to study, ultimately become an allergist, the challenge is, how do you connect your challenges, that is your past, to your career, which is your future? And here's the secret. So through your values, look at this values list, because I believe that if you look at the bottom, the challenges on the far left and your career on the far right, I believe it's your values that really connect those things. So for the student who wanted to become for both students actually, looking at their values, helping others was probably a value that became important to them. For the student, the porcelain god essay, security, safety, not having to fear was probably a really important value for her. So these give her the content to put into that essay. For type B students, so that endodontic student who didn't go through challenges but knew that he wanted to be an endodontist, the challenge is, how do you demonstrate that you have what it takes to be an excellent, whatever the career is? And as I just hinted at earlier, the secret here is, I believe, to reverse engineer the essay by beginning with the end in mind. So how do you do that? Well, I say like this: brainstorm the qualities of an excellent person in your future career and put it in the right column on a piece of paper. Just write this out. You write endodontist at the top and then qualities of a great endodontist. So he wrote down: desire to help others, detail-focused, interested in how the human body works, curiosity. And then in the left column, write down how you've developed each of these qualities. And some of these were clear. So for desire to help others, after-school math tutoring, was a way that he's shown that. Detail-focused, designing his own shoes demonstrates that. Interested in how the human body works. He had this thing about taking apart machines and wasn't really sure about the connection until later in the essay, which you'll read if you check it out. And then his curiosity, he said, well, I've always been curious. And so that's what he ended up putting for his example of being curious. But the key is the left side of the essay, because this is going to be the content that turns into specific images and examples that demonstrate that the student has actually developed these qualities. Because if you just write the right side of the essay, I've always liked helping others, being detail focused, and been interested in how the human body works, which is why I want to be an endodontist. If you start the essay like that, I think it kind of ruins the ending. I think it's kind of boring. So I encourage my students to think about the left side of the essay, the left side of this graph for their essay. So to really develop and get into details there, because that's what's going to make the essay pop. So for type C students, the challenge here, for students who have faced challenges but don't know what they want to study, is once you talk about overcoming your challenges, how do you end the essay? And I've got a lot of students, particularly my first gen students, who haven't had a lot of career coaching or don't really have a great sense of what's out there. They've been through a lot of stuff, but they're like, well, how do I go? What do I take it from here? And I don't want to keep beating this into you, but the first secret here is, again, look to your values. The values that a student chooses are going to be with you no matter what career you choose. So let's say the top step values for a student are, let's say, creativity and independence, and let's say, we're kind of leading toward a liberal arts kid. So let's say it's one of those kind of kids who's going to do great at liberal arts school. So creativity, independence, and let's say travel. So this is a kid who, as career counselor, you can kind of look in and say, okay, this is an artsy kid who's going to study abroad, right? So what I would have that student do is, while they're discussing the challenges, and this is not on the Prezi, but I'm just saying this, while they're discussing the challenges, really encourage them to show those values: creativity and travel and independence. How did you develop those values through the challenges that you faced? So what led you to develop independence? Was it the fact that, mom and dad gave you a bus pass when you were in 6th grade and you had to ride public transportation, as is happening right now with a student that I'm working with? So what are those challenges and how do you connect them to the values that will be important to you, so that when you end that essay, you're not ending with sort of, well, things are still tough, but I'm working through it. You're ending with, to me, creativity and travel and independence. My independence are going to be important to me no matter what. Now, that's kind of a literal expression of what I was suggesting, because the point is, right, to get detailed and specifics that the essay pops. But those are the values that can lead a student toward a nice ending. A second secret or second tip here is to use this 3-part structure. Is to discuss the challenges in the first 25% of the essay, to have a pretty soon transition right around the 25% point to talk about what I did about it, and then what I learned at the end. And oftentimes when I'm working with students, they'll be giving me, especially if they're just talking about it for the first time, it'll be like 75 or 80% challenges, or maybe it's 95% challenges. And then at the end of the essay, it's like, but I'm working through it. And what I tell them is, first of all, I say, great, and thank you so much for being willing to share this story. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to push all this up into the first quarter, or, I will allow students sometimes the first half of the essay, but we need a turning point at some point in the essay. So we see that the student did something about it and learned from it, because that's what colleges want to know. They want to know not only the context of what you've been through, but how did you metabolize those experiences to turn them into something like gold, and something that on a subconscious level is going to contribute something of value to a college campus. I have an 18-minute video on how to do this with a particular essay. If you just Google significant challenges, college essay guide video. Again, not an ad for the website, just more resources, and it's free. Okay, so type D, students who have not faced significant challenges and do know what they want to study. This can be the toughest type of kid to work with, right? And actually, let me stop myself and not call it a type of kid, because I really don't want to think of these as types of kids. I want to think of them as types of essays. So I'm glad I made that mistake, because I don't like, first of all, thinking of people as types, because then it feels like they're kind of boxed in. And it's totally possible for a kid to switch from type D type of essay to type B. In other words, if a student figures out, well, I actually know what I want to study now, then they write a type B essay. It's funny when I say B essay, but it's totally possible to switch types. And these aren't like fixed types. These are just ways of, thinking about it, a way of structuring an essay. So with students who haven't faced challenges and don't know what they want to study, the challenge is, how do you describe who you are and what you'll contribute to a college campus in an interesting and cohesive way, right? Despite the fact you've never had any challenges in no particular career. So I've got 3 ideas for this. The first one is to find a placeholder using Do What You Are. And you probably, if you've been counseling, know what Do What You Are is. But it's just, if you haven't gotten this book, I recommend go to Amazon and get this book today, because it's just, and I don't get paid for saying that, but it's just a beautiful resource for looking at a student's personality and typing a student, actually. And then based on that type, what particular passions and careers, what particular passions might they have, or preferences, I should say, might they have, and what careers might that lead to? So if a student is able to find a placeholder, and by that I mean, let's say a student is like interested in travel and languages, and the student goes, you know what, maybe I'll study linguistics. So I tell my students, you can totally switch your major if you want to when you get to college, but it can sometimes help if you can pick something at the end to kind of aim for, just a few things that you're interested in studying. And then students can kind of reverse engineer using that type B outline. So you'll just have to go back and maybe check out the website to see what that type B outline is. But it's basically saying, okay, if I like travel and I like linguistics, well, maybe then I write an essay about leading towards, some kind of career that will allow me to use linguistics and travel. And again, students can totally change that. But what it does is it leads students to think about the values and the ways that they developed those interests and those passions. And even if they change that placeholder before the essay is over, before they finish the essay writing process, they switch out, well, I don't actually want to go into linguistics. I want to go into this other career, translating or something else. Chances are the values and the qualities they've developed in the essay are going to still work and still make sense. And that all they're switching is the end of the essay. Another option for students who have no idea what they want to study and haven't really experienced challenges is to find a framing device based on something they love. So one example is I had a student who loved scrapbooking. So the essay that she ended up writing was the scrapbook of my life. And she ended up using the montage structure to jump around and talk about all these different really interesting aspects of her life. And then at the end, she ended with the values of travel, helping others, and family were important to her. Another student really loved applied math, so his essay was basically how he saw the world through applied math. So he was able to jump around and talk about his culture and talk about human relationships, all through the lens of applied math. So I encourage my students to, and the other example is the traveling and language essay that I just mentioned. So I'll sometimes ask my type D essay students, I'm trying not to call them type D students, but I'll sometimes ask them, what do you really love? What do you know a lot about? Because that might serve as a great framing device for your essay. Okay, this is the break in case of emergency thing. If you've got very little time left, or let's say you're working with a student, just a student on a one-time basis, and they just need some help, or it's a friend of a friend, here's a way to do it. First, decide which qualities the student would like to show. And there are lots of ways to do that. One of the ways is the objects exercise and the values exercise. I have some other resources on how to do that on the website. But so you decide which qualities would you like to show. What do you want to demonstrate? Another way, a simple way to do this is just on a sheet of blank paper, write down everything you want the college to know about you. So let's pick 5 to 8 of these things. And then instead of ending with your future career, end by naming the values that'll be important to you no matter what career you choose. So if you want, you can see an example by Googling College Essay Guy Scrapbook Essay for a big list of all these awesome qualities that the student had. And then here are some values that were going to be important to her. And I want to tell students, so for that scrapbook essay, that student ended up at Amherst, and a great liberal arts school. And I tell my students, it's totally possible to get into a great college if you don't know what you want to study and you haven't experienced challenges. It's just a matter of getting a little bit more creative and working a little bit hard. And so I tell my students to really be patient with that in terms of finding the content. Okay, how do I revise my essay? This would take too long to explain. So I'll encourage you to Google College Essay Guy Revising Your Essay in 5 Steps. But I'll give you the 30-second version of how to revise an essay. So a student sends me an essay via Google Docs, and it's a mess. And I look at it and I go, I don't even know what this essay is about. I don't know what to do. So rather than go in and try and revise it myself, here's the exercise. I tell my student to put in bold, to highlight in bold the first line, the first sentence of every single paragraph. So let me say that again. Highlight in bold the first sentence of every paragraph. And if there are 2 ideas in a paragraph, split it into separate paragraphs. Or if a student has written one huge long paragraph, you may need to actually split it into paragraphs for them, separate the ideas, and then highlight the first sentence of each paragraph in bold. Okay, that's step 1. Step 2, read it aloud. So read not read the whole essay, but read each bolded sentence aloud. And listen. And when the student does this, they're going to learn a lot about the essay. They're going to learn a lot about the organization, and in particular, what students like to call the flow of the essay. And you'll hear, and you can both hear it if you do this together, you'll hear when the essay is flowing, when it's making sense, and when it's not, just based on the first sentence of each paragraph. Okay, so step 3 is to rewrite those sentences in bold in order to make sense of what is the main idea you want us to get from this paragraph. So what's the main point? What's the specific point you want from this paragraph? Put it in one bold sentence and put it at the beginning of each paragraph. And then step 4 is kind of obvious, but rewrite the paragraphs so that they match those sentences. And those sentences could be aspirational, meaning those sentences don't have to reflect what's currently in the first draft, but what you'd like it to say. So rewrite the essay based on these new bolded sentences. And then I tell my students, step 5 is go for a walk, take some time away from it, and then come back and repeat. Put the sentences in bold and read it again. If it's working, great. If it's not working, do it again. And then, once they've done it a couple times, I'll have them send it back to me. Okay, so the 5th question I often get is, how do I bring my essay to life? In other words, how do I make it not boring? And the framing device I want to use for this is mediocre advice made better. So, I've spent a lot of time, or I spend some time, seeing what other people have to say about essays. I spend a lot of time writing about it. And sometimes I'll be like, what does U.S. News and World Report or, another website have to say about college essays? And I find that sometimes there's some mediocre advice. So I'm taking 3 of the bits of mediocre advice that I've heard, which are kind of, conventional wisdom, and I've tried to make them better. So the mediocre piece of advice number 1 is to choose a great opening. And I read this so much and I'm like, yeah, of course you want to choose a great opening, but how do we do it? So a more specific, or I think better thing to say is to begin with a problem that must be solved. And this is what most movies do, right? Watch any movie and in the first 5 minutes, there's a problem. Somebody's got a problem that they got to figure out. And we're hooked in to figure out, are they going to solve this problem? Here's an example from a past student essay. This is my favorite essay. The I Shot My Brother essay. Listen to this. From page 54 of the maroon notebook sitting on my mahogany desk. Then Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Genesis 4:13. Here's a secret that no one in my family knows. I shot my brother when I was 6. Luckily, it was a BB gun. But to this day, my older brother Jonathan does not know who shot him. And I have finally promised to confess this 11-year-old secret to him after I write this essay. So, such a great problem, right? He shot his brother. Well, why, we wonder? What happened? What would lead someone to shoot his brother? Now, notice in the sentence after that, he says, luckily it was a BB gun. So he's raised the stakes by giving us an interesting problem and kind of scary, but then he's kind of deflated. He's kind of taken some of the air out of it by saying it was a BB gun. But he does a really smart thing after it. He gives us a new problem. He says, my brother doesn't know who shot him, and I promise myself to confess this secret to him after I write this essay. So it raises this new question for us, like, oh, okay. Well, then the question is his brother going to find out? Is he going to tell him? Is he going to confess to him? And how's that going to go? And that's a question that we're willing to, at least on a subconscious level, stick around and wait to find out the answer to. So students who are struggling to find an opening, what's a problem? And the problem, remember, if the problem is answered in the first paragraph or the second paragraph, you better have something more interesting that's kind of, and if I'm using my hands here, it's kind of making an arc. The problem makes an arc, and that arc should end at the end of the essay. If you've got a little tiny arc that starts at the beginning and then has a little arc that ends at the end of the second paragraph, you better start a new arc, that is to say a new question somewhere before you answer that first question that's going to take us to the end of the essay. And that's kind of what he does here. So he makes a little arc, I shot him, but it was a BB gun. But there's this new arc. But to this day, my older brother Jonathan. So we've really got two questions. Why did he shoot his brother? And is he going to confess to him? And he said he's going to do it at the end of the essay. So we know we need to wait till the end of the essay to figure this out. Now, this is not something that I imposed on this student, by the way. This was something that the student did. And I was like, wow, that's really working really well. Why is that working so well? And I thought, oh my gosh, it's like movies. This is when I was starting to realize the connections between screenwriting and movies. So this is not me saying, here's how you have to do this to my student and the student executing it. It's more like, wow, this is really cool. How does it work? And this is how I find that it works. Okay. Another piece of advice that I hear a lot is show, don't tell. This is not bad advice. This is good advice in the sense that it's an invitation to students who tend to tell or who tend to, explain things, are thinking like an English essay. They're giving the thesis and the examples. It's an invitation to show, to use details and images to really bring the essay to life. And it's something that I'm sure you've said yourself to students. But the better advice, and I kind of missed the framing here, is, let me just scoot it over, is to show first and then tell. Okay, to show first and then tell. And what I mean by this is, I think college admissions officers, while I think they're interested in reading an interesting story and, seeing an interesting movie, as it were, I think the college admissions readers also want to know that the student understands it or is somehow able to reflect on that in an interesting and critical way. So I think it's important to show first and then tell. And let me give an example. So here's a nice show. So this is from that machines essay earlier. Many nights you'll find me in the garage replacing a car's standard chrome trim with an elegant piano black finish, or changing the threads on the stitching of the seats to add a personal touch. Okay, lovely. But for me, who's somebody who doesn't necessarily care about cars it's a cool image. He's doing this, he's kind of being creative. But look what happens when he follows it with a tell. So just to review the first part, many nights you'll find me in the garage replacing standard chrome trim with an elegant piano black finish or changing the threads on the stitching of the seats to add a personal touch. As I believe a few small changes can transform a generic product into a personalized work of art. Boom. Wow. Suddenly it opens up for me because he's connected to some values, something that's universal. So the idea of connecting, and I believe art is universal. The idea of, replacing these things, isn't necessarily going to get him into college, right? It's like, well, cool, you can work on cars. But the reflection and the insight that he's able to turn this thing into a work of art, and then he recognizes that, is an insight that makes me sit up and go, oh, this is a special kid. And I call this an insight, this thing in bold, and I think it's the most important quality of a college essay. Because what an insight is to me is, and I think it's important to define this for kids, because I think often teachers are saying, and I sometimes have been guilty of saying, insight, give us insight. What is insight? Well, it's something simply that you know that we don't know. And in this case, it's something you know about your life or the circumstances of your life, and you're saying it in a way that I wouldn't necessarily say it. And so that's what's in a roundabout answer to the question of how do you stand out? You provide a specific insight about a specific circumstance that's particular to your experience that I couldn't have come up with. And I think it's important to show first and then tell, because the show allows me, the reader, to be engaged with this movie and to be making my own connections. Oh, cool. Why is he telling me about this standard chrome trim? And then when the student comes in with his or her own insight, I go, oh, wow, well, I didn't even think about that. So it makes it surprising. So I kind of, if you think about this like a bunch of paths, as I'm reading this, all these paths are opening up for possibilities for, well, where is this going to go? Where is the student taking this? And then the student takes us down a really interesting path. For me, they transform a generic, and for me, what this does is that it actually transforms a generic essay into a personalized work of art. Sorry, I didn't mean to get so meta there. I just realized that the form completely matched the content here. That was kind of a happy accident. So I really love things like that. The show demonstrates that you're a talented writer, while the tell demonstrates you're a critical thinker. Be both. It's totally possible to be both. Show first and then tell. Here's another example of it, but I'm going to just let you look at this later. You can go ahead and pause the video and you can see that here's a student who talks about his grandmother's house, and then he's got this mystery. Well, how did the heavy roof, how was it supported? And then in the second paragraph talks about applied math, about how applied math helped him see that. And then he's got this insight at the end that I'll let you read later, where he says, understanding its structural design gave me a deeper appreciation for its aesthetic beauty. It's like this boom moment, this tell that just lights the whole thing up in a new way. So again, show first and then tell. And that's a personal preference. There can be reasons to tell first and then show. And I think particularly it's a good time to do it in an English essay. But I just believe that when we're doing something that's a visual art form like this, give us the movie first and then give us the interpretation. Third mediocre piece of advice, write what you know. I hear this all the time. Write what you know, write what you know. What does that even mean? Well, I say to my students, use geeky language. So rather than write what you know, write specifically what you know. For example, like this, from the machines essay. I'm the math geek, the student writes, who marvels at the fundamental theorems of calculus, or who sees beauty in A equals whatever that says. Again, he says it's in the details. One bracket off or one digit missing and the whole equation collapses. And details are more than details. They can mean the difference between negative and positive infinity, an impossible range of solutions. Okay, so two things are happening here. One, he's using geeky language. So he's got this complex, he uses the terms fundamental theorems, and then he uses this complex equation, which I have no idea what it means. But then he interprets it for me a little bit. He lets me know, I, who am not a math person, and the reader is likely not going to know what this means, I'm thinking, is that if there's a bracket off or digit missing, the whole equation collapses. And beyond that, it can mean the difference between negative and positive infinity. So not only is he giving me geeky language, something specific that he knows about that I don't, he's teaching me something in a very simple way. And three, he's giving me a little insight into it. So he's doing the same thing, that show then tell thing. So he's showing me this formula, but he's not leaving me hanging there, just showing off. He's actually breaking it down in a really accessible way. And I tell my students, if you can teach the reader something, especially, he doesn't send, 3 sentences and a little paragraph here. Great. Teach me something. What do you know a ton about? And especially with my high level students, and especially for the intellectual idea essay that Stanford asked for example, I say, go crazy, like sound like the young mathematician or the young, pharmacist or whatever that is. If you know some stuff, show some stuff. And again, not to show off, but break it down for me. The tell actually takes away some of the feeling that the student is just bragging. Okay. So I've answered the 5 questions that I think I get, or I've given some resources for answering the 5 questions that I'm most often asked. But I'm also often asked, because I didn't want to call it the 6 questions, what should I be doing right now? So students ask me, is it too late? Should I start my essay now? Should I start it? When should I start it? So what I developed is this little college prep timeline. And it was interesting that I didn't find this online when I went to look for it. But if you look closely, you'll see in junior year, let's go down to summer, which is where we are right now. I believe students should be visiting 2 to 3 colleges, attending a summer program or working a summer job or both, and beginning their personal statements. And then as we move down into senior year in September, go to college fairs. I want them to be aware of that. Take the SAT or SAT again, or be prepping for that. Start thinking about your rec letters, decide if you're going to do early action or early decision. So, it's not enough information for them to know, what these things are, but it gives them, oh, should I be thinking about early action or early decision? So this resource is available on my website. All you need to do is go to, is just go to College Essay Guy, and it's at the very bottom of the site. You can click on it. It's a PDF. You can download it and print it out. I welcome that. So if you're interested in more brainstorming ideas, if you're looking for more questions, sometimes it's kind of like, well, I have my questions, my go-to questions, but I'd like some more questions. I put together this resource with some of my friends called 100 Brave and Interesting Questions. And it was initially called 100. I put it together because my friend was having trouble connecting with people in social circumstances. So it was initially called, questions for strangers at parties. But I realized that again, like, connecting things from my life to my work, that these were actually really great questions to ask students. So I took out some of the more adult questions and I put in some more, student center focused ones, but they're really just deep and interesting questions. And you can find them just by Googling, go to College Essay Guy, Google 100 Brave and Interesting Questions, and they are there. And just to give you a little bit more sense of what's on the website, here's a list of resources: how to create a to-do list, how to make the activities list awesome, which Common App essay prompt is the best, everything from that to how to choose your major. So all these resources are on the website. They're totally free. And I really invite you to check them out and to share them with your students. And I welcome your feedback too. I love, love, love hearing from counselors and just connecting and, saying, hey, hearing from somebody who says, hey, I've got this really cool resource that I use. We want to check it out. And I'll be like, wow, that's really cool. So I respond to all the emails that I get, and I really, really welcome feedback and input. Or, hey, wouldn't it be great if there was this kind of resource? That's actually how I created that college essay map, the timeline. Is I said to a counselor friend, do you know of an infographic that just maps out the college experience or the college timeline? And she's like, no, you should create it. So that's why I created it. So I really welcome ideas. So here's the website, College Essay Guy. If you just scroll down to resources you'll see it, students, parents, counselors. Just click on counselors. That's where you'll find that. When you click on that, you'll also find resources. You'll find a place where you can subscribe to my email list to get updates. Here are some resources. I'm doing a 6-week webinar series, and the first webinar, it's an hour long, and I posted it there. It's called Using the Secrets of Screenwriting. Whoops, it says Using the Secrets of Secrets. I need to change that. That sounds kind of meta and really deep. Using the Secrets of Secrets. I wonder what that means. But it's Using the Secrets of Screenwriting to write your college essay. And if you're interested, I'm doing a 6-week webinar. And I'm in the middle of it right now, but you can totally join in and catch up. And I basically go into more depth into each of these elements, and I share more resources. And the way I recommend doing it is by working through the process with a student, so that we can work one-on-one and figure out how do we find some creative ways to work through this. Another way some counselors are doing it, which I really love, is writing your own personal statement, your own response to the UC1 prompt with another counselor, and being coached and coaching another counselor through that process is an amazing experience that I highly recommend. And for me, writing my own personal statement, working with a counselor, was just an amazing process. And it was really affirming and helped me understand more about why I do what I do and why I love what I do. So if you're interested, that webinar, here are the session topics: finding your deepest story, how do you outline, giving feedback, best practices, and then working particularly with students' particular issues. So if you're interested, I have some pay what you can spots available for the webinar. So just email me ASAP, ethan@collegeessayguy.com. I love to hear from you, whether you're interested in the webinar or just, feedback on this or other resources that you're interested in. I'm always interested in collaborating with counselors. And this brings me to resource number 157. And what do you mean by, well, I gave you that list of 100 brainstorming questions. I kind of cheated, but there were 156 resources, and the 157th resource is in the word Ethan, because that's me. I want to be for you a resource, and that's why I do this work, is I want to help students write better essays, and I want to help counselors help students write better essays, because I believe that if I help counselors, I'm helping more students have enriching, amazing experiences. And I really, really am committed to you as a counselor and me learning from each other, so that we can help students better, because that's what there's no conflict of interest when it comes to helping students. So I invite your feedback. I invite your input. I know I've said that 3 times, but I'm just underscoring it. Please email me, and I'd love to have you on the webinar if you're interested. So thanks so much.